Hi friends, the other day I went on a huge rant about a drug Buddhist festival that went on here in LA. Don't want to talk about that too much. I probably got a little too angry, but there you go. The thing I want to talk about today is why I think that happened, or why I think there are still this strong association between drugs and Buddhism. Buddhism came to the West and to America specifically at a time of books like this. The Psychedelic Experience by Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and Ralph Metzner. This was a translation, a kind of translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a Buddhist holy book, which reframes the Tibetan Book of the Dead as a guide to having a good acid trip. Oh, look, I got a bookmark in there. So you can tell I've been reading it. And it was also a time of records like this. And, of course, this, which I like a lot better these days. And the spectacular 101 String Sounds of Today. Actually, a really good album, very surprisingly. Go listen to it if you can. I think it might be on Spotify or one of those things. It's definitely on YouTube. But yeah, so it came to America at the time of a lot of experimentation with psychedelic drugs. They were the new thing, and then Indian spirituality and later on Japanese and Chinese spirituality was the big thing. So they became very much intertwined in a lot of people's minds. And there's this idea that these things are intimately connected with Buddhism, like the use of psychedelics is an obvious thing for Buddhists to do. But I think if you translated, for example, this recent article from Lion's Roar magazine, The New Wave of Buddhist Psychedelics, if you translated that into Japanese or Chinese or Thai or Vietnamese and presented it to Buddhists over there, the people that kind of started this thing, or were the first to pick up on it anyway, or earlier than us, I think the reaction you get would even be louder and more angry than what I did over the past weekend on Twitter and Facebook, if you watched any of that nonsense go down. Nonsense on my part. So I think this use of drugs is extremely foreign to the very foundational ideas of Buddhist practice. And you can find this even in some of the earliest literature about Buddhism that came out in America. For example, I know that in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki and in Buddha is the Center of Gravity by Joshu Sasaki, both of those books are created from lectures by those teachers and have Q&A sections in them. And people ask about drugs in those, and those teachers say, no, these drugs that you're taking, you crazy kids, you crazy hippie kids in Northern California or in Southern California, this is not connected with Buddhist practice. And so the original teachers were very clear about that. A lot of them were. But their immediate descendants, they weren't so clear about it. And so this kind of got intertwined with the practice. And frankly, I find it really, really disturbing how this has crept into Buddhism in such a way that people are having a hard time seeing that these are very, very different sorts of paths. It kind of reminds me of a few years ago I was asked to speak at this gathering called Starwood in somewhere in rural Ohio. It's a bit like Burning Man. It's like a Eastern Coast-ish version of Burning Man. And I saw all these older sort of baby boomer people kind of acting as like gurus and mentors to these young 20-something and even teen-something people, and kind of encouraging them to do drugs and how to take a trip and have spiritual awareness and all this stuff. And I'm going, oh God, that generation, why don't they just die? I'm sorry, I don't want to get generational with you here, but this is something that the people coming out of the milieu that I did, the whole punk rock milieu, we'd seen where this went. We saw where this went culturally, this great experiment on expanding our minds with drugs and having these great experiences that were going to change the world and usher in the age of Aquarius. We saw where that went. It led to a lot of burnout people, a lot of people who just became just as bad as the previous generation in their materialism and their whatever. So the thing is, when it comes to me, mixing Buddhism with drugs is it's kind of like, why don't they allow athletes who use steroids to compete in the Olympics? It's because it's a different kind of athletics when you introduce steroids into it, and it's not. It doesn't work, and it's also very dangerous to the athletes themselves. The same deal with enlightenment that comes from drugs. It's a very different sort of thing. It's an enhancement. It's something that you get without doing the necessary work to get to the place you want to get, and because of that you get thrown in there and you have no idea what the hell's going on, and you get thrown back, and that's no good at all. Now, people over on Twitter were asking me things like, well, what about somebody who gets an injury? One guy said injury to his rotator cuff, isn't that right there? That he was prescribed opioids for, and people who take antidepressants and things like that. Does that ruin their Buddhist practice? And I think those are a whole different area. They're not doing that stuff to try to enhance their Buddhist practice. It's just something that they're kind of stuck with, and they're trying to do Buddhist practice at the same time, and that's a whole different area. What I object to is when you're saying that this is part of the Buddhist practice or compatible with the Buddhist practice as like an enhancement to it, or kind of kickstarts it or jump starts it or moves it up to the next level. You completely missed the point of Buddhist practice altogether when you start saying things like that. So there's my rant. It's all the fault of the baby boomers, which is, I don't think that's really true. But that sort of generational thing has come into it, and it's really, I think, weird. I spent enough time in Japan to kind of know what it feels like to kind of come from that area and see all the drugs are Buddhism stuff. It's just like, what the hell are you talking about? It's so bizarre. So thank you. There's a little rant for Monday. If you want to donate to my ranting some more, there are PayPal and Patreon links below. That's how I make my living. I really appreciate all your support, and see you next time.